in 1997, the first Christmas party that I had on the Wise Men came about. So I had a 12-year-old daughter who now is 33 and has 4 children. And then my son Davis, who's back there right now, was 7 years old, and he was coming out here to St. John's Academy that was meeting here on this property. So he was here for 1st and 2nd grade, tormented everybody while he was here. And then I had a 4-year-old daughter who's now married and has her own baby. And then that was the year that I gave birth to my fourth child, who was a whopping 10-pounder. And that year was remarkable for me because he was so big that I had such pains that I had to drive around those carts in the grocery store, you know, because I had this big old belly and my legs were spread out like this because he was so big, he was just a bruiser. But so I remember that year. That was the year I had a Wonders and Wise Men in my home, and I decorated with purple, and it wasn't as pretty as this. But anyway, that's when I did it. But so much has changed since 1997. For one thing, you know, my whopping 10-pound baby is now 21 years old, playing baseball in college. And I used to run half marathons all the time. And now all I do is run back and forth to the Mayo Clinic. Some of you know what I'm talking about, don't you? I mean, it's awful. It's awful. And it was so much about my hopes and my dreams and my children. And now 3 of my children aren't even mine anymore, which is not bad because my daughter-in-law is right here, and I'm very proud of her for taking Davis away from me. But he's yours now, baby. He's all yours. But you know, I have mourned the loss of being a young mother. I had so much ahead of me. I ended up having another child after that. You know, I just had so many, but it was my hopes and my dreams. And today, more than anything, I feel like I need to have wisdom in the way that I view the world, and I need to be wise like the wise men were to seek him. Even though I know him, so many of you are here, you know what Christmas is about. You know it's the celebration of our Savior, Jesus Christ, and we know it, but it's so easy to let it slip by. And I need to seek him with everything that's in me, and I know that you do too, so it's a privilege for me to be able to share this message with you today, and I hope it'll be of help to you as well. So today, let's begin with the wise men studied and they thought and they prepared to seek the King of the Jews. And they did a lot of work in preparation to get there. And so the question would be, in my life today and in your life as well, what are you seeking? What are you searching for? The wise men were searching for the King of the Jews. What are we seeking? What is it that we're trying to get beyond us? So over the past year, I've had to consider what's been going on with me. And I'll tell you about it later. It hadn't been pretty. But I heard that, so I read this somewhere. It says, in our culture today, we listen with our eyes and we think with our feelings. Listen with our eyes and think with our feelings. And I don't know about you, but anybody who knows me knows that my feelings run haywire. I mean, my mother said, Kimberly, you're so dramatic. And then she would say, Kim's always the one who's going to cry. You know, so I was just up and down. All my life I've been that way. And so my feelings, it's a shame, but my feelings have such an influence on the way that I feel, on the way that the things that I do, the way I react to people. So I don't want to be like the culture, a person who listens with my eyes and thinks with my feelings. I want to do, as the Apostle Paul wrote in Ephesians, he said, may the eyes of your heart be enlightened so that you can know the hope to which you've been called. So that we can, may the eyes of our heart not be influenced by what we see around us, but may our heart see the Savior who gave his life for us. May our heart see the hope that we have in him. Not based on what we see, but what we believe in our heart, the truths that are deep down in our hearts. And so when the wise men were searching for something that they hadn't seen, they'd done all the studying, they'd done all the research that they could do, but they were seeking the King of the Jews, and it was at great sacrifice that they went to find him. Some say that it took as much as 2 years for them to actually find him. So my question for you and for myself would be, what is it that I seek? What is it that you seek? If I'm honest, I was in my sewing room this morning cutting out pieces of fabric for my son and daughter-in-law's third child, a little boy. They call him Tiger. The girls don't want to admit that it's a child, so they call him a tiger. And so I've been making a quilt. She'd sent me some pictures, and it's a cute little patchwork quilt. But I had a jillion things to do, but I love getting in my sewing room and accomplishing things. I like being creative. I like saying, oh, finish that. You know, when I get in bed at the end of the day, I'll say, oh, thank you, God, that I got so much done today. I mean, that's just the way I think. I seek success in accomplishing things, or being effective in what I do, or being creative. And I don't know what you seek, but I'm driven by that. And it can be very depleting, especially when I'm not able to do it. But usually those accomplishments make me feel good. But if you're anything like me, we can quickly become addicted to feelings. So if I made one quilt, I feel good. Why don't I make 3? You see what I mean? And it gets to where it just goes on and on and on, and it can absolutely drive you crazy. But scientists have shown us that there are neural pathways in the brain that travel to the heart of our desires, or things that we're seeking. I have a desire to accomplish things. I'm seeking success. And so the neural pathways that travel through our brain with desires are not the same as the neural pathways that go to our feelings. And so we may think that if we accomplish that which we seek, or if we meet our desires, that it's going to make us happy. But scientists are saying that they're not even connected. And yet we keep thinking, if I just do this, if I just have a friendship with this person, if I just invest my time in this way, I'm going to be having fun and I'm going to be happy. But it's not consistent. And so we can really wear ourselves out trying to do that. And so, if that's the case, our eyes may tell us, you need this. You know, this is where my eyes take. I was at the Walmart yesterday morning. I got there at 9 in the morning thinking I'd beat the crowd. And I got there and the line was way long and I had stuff packed up this high. And as I was in the line, I started looking at all the magazines. And so my eyes are telling me, you need to decorate your front door like that. You need to lose those 20 extra pounds, and you need to be younger, and you need to be smart, but my eyes will tell me all these things as I'm standing in line at the Walmart, exhausted. But my eyes are still telling me, you need this, and it can really drive us nuts. But what is it that we think we need? We think we need things. We think we need people. I'm miserable because my friends are all mean. I'm going to get new friends. I'm miserable because my husband's mean. I'm going to get a new husband. We just start thinking, my problem is you. My problem is you. I need new people. I need new people. I need new things. Maybe I need new places. How many vacations do we plan in our head? I can't stand my husband, but if we go to Alaska, it's going to be great. And as nice as it may be, and I'm all for spending time alone with your husband, let me tell you that, but it never achieves the level of happiness that I think it will, because it's not intended to do that. We are to invest in our marriages if we have one, but if we're thinking that it's going to satisfy us in this happy way, it always fails to satisfy. So if we're searching for anything apart from the Christ of Christmas, we're pretty much doomed. There was this article that was written by Joan Jacobs Broomberg, and she studied the diaries of teenage girls. Now, that had to be interesting. Did y'all write in the diaries? My oldest daughter is a little dramatic like I am, and she used to write in her diary, and I found some of them under her bed after she moved out, and they were just hilarious. And she was always talking about the bane of her existence, her brother Davis. She would say, Davis got 5 spankings today. I wish he would listen to our mother. He is going to be in trouble. And she was a mess too. But, and so she would write in this self-righteous way. And then she'd say, and I'm always going to be obedient to mommy. And then when she got a little older, it was about boys. So-and-so looked at me when he came into class the other day. She was just, so anyway, diaries of teenage girls can be pretty funny. But in the 1800s, consistently, the people were writing about concerns for other people. You know, I've noticed this about so-and-so tomorrow. I'm going to try to be friendlier with her. But it was outward focused to make the world a better place, mainly. I don't know why, but that's what it was. But compared to 1982, everything was turned about what I need to accomplish, the goals that I need to set for myself. Primarily, it was about their appearance. And this is 1982. Look at us now. But what that says, and what she suggested, is that over the last 100 years, we as a culture, as it's been demonstrated with teenage girls, are more obsessed with ourselves than with what's out there. And what I would say is that it's a sad state of affairs to be in, but the wise men, wise as they were, knew that just living for themselves would never satisfy. They were looking for something bigger than they were. They were looking for the King of the Jews. They knew they probably had scriptures, because the wise men came from, I think they were first noted 6 centuries BC, and we see them mentioned in the book of Daniel. The wise men that were there, Nebuchadnezzar hired the wise men to come in to tell him about his dreams and tell him the fortunes of all those people. So they were very acquainted with Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and so I'm sure that they became familiar with the Jewish traditions and possibly the written literature as well. But they wanted to find something that was beyond themselves. They wanted to look outward. It wasn't about what can I do to make myself happy, it's what do I need to seek that's bigger than me. And I would suggest that's what we need to live for something bigger than ourselves. And the more we're focused inwardly, the more twisted and miserable we're going to be. When it comes to going to visit a king, I guess the etiquette would say that you're supposed to bring gifts. Have y'all been taught that? When you go to see a king, you're supposed to bring gifts? Some of you know this, but I was sent to a very silly camp in Central Texas, and you had to be on the waiting list when you were born to go there, and people would come from Europe, and it was in the hill country of Texas, and I'm from West Texas, so I thought it was gorgeous, beautiful. But one of the things I learned to do there, I had corrective classes at camp. You'd think some people play badminton and tennis. No, we had correctives classes, and we learned that grace comes from pushing from the earth and easy in each building block. So we would learn how to move gracefully, and we learned what to do when we meet the queen. Not the king, but the queen. And this is what every 10-year-old girl needs to know. Living in Central Texas, when you meet the queen, and we'd say, the queen of what? When you meet the queen, this is how you meet her. So you're escorted, so you have this imaginary escort, and you go with the escort, and then when you stop, the queen is there looking at you. So then you get there, and you meet the queen, and you drop your eyes, then you look at your escort, and then you let your hand float down like this. And then you move a little bit to shuffle your skirt. And here we are in you're wearing white shorts, tennis shoes, sweaty shirt, but you ruffle your skirt like this, and then very gently, you put your foot around like this, and then you go all the way down. And I'm not going to do it because I can't do it anymore. But I learned that you go all the way down, and then you put your head nose to the floor. This is what you're supposed to do when you meet the queen. So if you need a tutorial on that, I'd be happy to tell you any other time. But the wise men knew that when you go to see a king, you should bring gifts. And I think it's prophetic that they brought gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Gold was the symbol of royalty, so he was the king. Frankincense was used in worship. The incense would be burned, and so that was a sign of the priests as a priest. And then the last one was the weird one. Myrrh, you can use it as incense, but it was an orange resin that was ground up and mixed to be an anesthetic. It was offered to Jesus on the cross. But most importantly, it was used for embalming bodies so that they wouldn't decay. which is a weird thing to give a baby. You know, it just makes you wonder. And so I would think that the reason they gave the gifts was more about us learning about who this baby was than it was about honoring him. But they came and they did, I'm sure, what the Holy Spirit led them to do, which is really good for all of us. But in Psalm 116, verse 12, it says, "What shall I render to the Lord for all of his benefits to me?" That's a good question. I mean, God gave me life. He's given me a family. He's given me so many beautiful things. What can I give to him? What in the world can I give to him? And about 3 months ago, a friend of mine who is she's very musical, and I am not, but she's very musical, and she was telling me about an opera called Amal and the Night Visitors. Y'all aren't very musical either, are you? I didn't see anybody going, "Oh yes, the opera." Well, in 1951, it was a one-act opera that was performed in the Rockefeller Center and simultaneously broadcast on television in 1951. So it was before my time. But the story goes like this. There was this crippled boy named Amal, and he was living in kind of a poor home, and they were crooked. They were thieves, and they weren't really very moral people, but he was a poor child, and they had a night visitor that came, 3 night visitors, the wise men. And so when the wise men came in, they started telling them through all the songs, the whole song goes like that, and that's how you follow the story. But when you got there, they said, "This is the King of the Jews, and we're coming to bring him presents, and he is the Son of God." And so they said, "Is there anything you want to send with us?" And Amal, at the end of the opera, the only thing he had was his crutch. He was a cripple. And the only way he could move around or even go to pinch pennies off people was with his crutch. And he looked at it and he said, "The only thing I have to give is the only thing that I need to live." And yet he was willing to give it up for the King of Kings. And when he gave it up, he was healed. So it's a really sweet story. But what it says to me is, when I'm thinking about what I can give God, I have to be saying this: I will no longer depend upon this, and I'm giving it over to you, God. I'm going to trust you. So I would ask you, what is it that you depend upon that you'd be afraid to lose? Maybe that's where we need to start when we start thinking about what we could give the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings during this time. So that made me think about my own situation when I was one of the things that I've always been aware of was the way I looked. And in my family, it was very important to look a certain way. And so I care about what I look like. And it's really a pretty dreary thing to be doing these days because it gets worse and worse all the time. And I wish I just didn't care anymore. But in my monologue of all my woes, I had to go to the dentist because drinking coffee was giving me a toothache, and I wasn't going to give up the coffee. So I went, and they said I needed a root canal. Well, I'd never had a root canal before, but they said, "You need it, and you need to go get it now. There's an opening, drive to 210, go in, it's no problem." So I went in, and this man who looked like he was younger than my son came in and said, "Well, ma'am, so you're having a little toothache?" And so anyway, he numbed me up. He always says, "It'll be a little bit of discomfort." And he starts going, "Boo, boo, boo," and it was boo. But anyway, I had the root canal. It was not fun. If any of you have had them before, they're not fun at all. But I didn't realize that all the drilling and the hammering and all that stuff, I was on a medication for my back pain. Yes, I've got back pain too. And it makes you bleed. So I got home. By the end of the night, I looked like I'd been beaten up. You can still see it. You see this bruise right here? I mean, it's not bad. It's just a little purple and brown now. Well, Thanksgiving, I wanted to look good for all the family, 200 of them. And I showed up with this big old hematoma, and everybody thought David had beat me up. And it was horrible. But I started, as I was thinking about this, I thought, God, can I give up the desire to look good? And I heard God say, yes, you're going to have to. But I mean, because it was like, What else can I do? You know, it's going fast. And I tried putting makeup on. I tried wearing a scarf around my neck. That wouldn't work. So I just finally ended up, talking to people, and they'd say, whoa, what happened to you? But that was one of the, am I willing to let that go for Jesus? Am I even willing? Well, I've been pushed into it. That's what I've been pushed into. So the wise men bowed down and they worshiped Jesus. And this is significant because the magistrate comes from the Magi. So they were legal-minded, they were physicians, they were very well educated, very bright, usually very wealthy. And so for them to bow down and humble themselves and worship Jesus is pretty significant. And then I started thinking, how do I worship Jesus? Am I willing to give him my worship? David and Reese and I flew out to Washington State, and while we were there, we went to see Snoqualmie Falls. And I don't know if you've been there, but it takes your breath away. It's the biggest waterfall I've ever seen. The spray was so huge, and we had a long walk to go, so you could walk down further and further and further to see the magnitude of this beautiful waterfall. And there's nothing you can do except just look at it with your mouth hanging open. And I'd say, Dad, I tried taking pictures, but it wasn't as good. And everybody there was just, we were just thunderstruck. It was amazing. But I was thinking the only appropriate thing to do was to share the joy of seeing it with the people next to you. And so strangers were saying, can you get over that? Look at the way the waters cut the rocks. I mean, it was breathtaking. And you know what I'm talking about. Something in nature, something magnificent that all you can do is just soak it in and want to share it with somebody else. And if that is something that God created, how much more should we learn how to be in awe and worship God? But what I tend to think of is, what can I do for him? I want to do something for God. Like, I want to do something for the Snoqualmie Falls? It's as ridiculous as thinking, I'm going to bestow upon you, Snoqualmie Falls, a gift. And so I get some buckets and I climb up the 10 miles to the top of the mountain and I pour the water in. And doesn't that just add to your experience? It's ridiculous. So what can we add to the glory of God? But give him our worship, which means enjoy him and delight in him with others and to taste and see. And all the experience that I had at that waterfall made me think that's what God wants from us. And it's kind of hard to connect with. It's different than the waterfall, but it's even greater in magnitude and wonder. And so we need to think about it. Am I able to worship without trying to do something about it? One of the experiences that I have that I despised and hated and denied for many years is I'm an alcoholic. And I knew I was from the first drink when I was in college. I am glad that God has allowed me to have this life experience because I'm able to share it with other people. I remember the first time I talked to another woman who was an alcoholic, and it was just like a cool breeze on my face because nobody understood. Nobody understood. And so I am able to work with women all the time who suffer like I do. And this is a gift that God has given me that I can actually use as I worship God, because I see it as a privilege that he's given me, a unique privilege that he's given me. And he's given you the same sort of unique life experience that he wants you to use as you worship him. And I think that's something to think about. But the last thing is this. When it comes to giving up my will, in other words, thy will, not mine be done, or giving over what I don't want to give over, giving up my disappointments, giving up bitterness. I mean, I am so stupid, but I have been holding a resentment against God for the past 15 years about getting older. I mean, really, it's ridiculous that I would think that of everyone in all humanity, that I would be the one who deserved to not get old. I mean, I have been through so many MRIs and CAT scans and X-rays. The people, they know me first name basis now at Mayo. And they'll say, oh, today you're looking straight up. Oh, tomorrow you're going to be looking down. Just put your shoulder over there. Oh, that looks good. They all know me. All the poking and the prodding and everything they tell me. Degenerative arthritis, ma'am. Degenerative arthritis. And I'm going to say, I hate degenerative arthritis. Why me? Why me? But that's kind of part of it. We all get older, don't we? And I thought, I have to give over my disappointment, my ridiculous disappointment in the fact that I'm getting older. Give it up. And here's another one. I have to give up my religious zeal and behaviors from the past. In my mind, I say, but God, I've always done this. I've always done this. This is what I'm made for. And I'm not able to do it anymore for one reason or another. Or I'm sensing that I need to move out of it. And that is so hard for me to give up anything because I think God needs me to keep teaching Bible studies forever and ever, and that's ridiculous. It's like me telling Snoqualmie Falls that they need me to go and pour the water down the top. It's ridiculous. It's all about me, and it should be all about Him. Before all this happened, I guess it was last spring, I had a hip problem. And I remember it because it was spring break, and I had gone out to the beach or something with my children, and we had a baby goat that we were taking out, and it was very windy and cold, and my hip was causing me all kinds of problems, and I couldn't sleep. And so I went in, and the doctor told me, well, it's degenerative arthritis, all those things. But I was having pain in my private area, and they said, well, we're setting you up with a physical therapist, and it is a pelvic floor therapist. Now, in case you don't know what that is, it's very private and very personal. And I walked in, and the woman said, oh, I've heard you speak at Christmas time. It was bad. But she was very lovely and as proper as she could be, but it's humiliating. I mean, birthing a baby, at least you get to push something out. But when you're going in for pelvic floor physical therapy, I don't know. It was just a little bit humiliating. And so in all this whole thing, I've been having to give over, and I've been saying, I'm sick of hurting. I've always been able to do this. I've never had to humiliate myself with pelvic floor physical therapy. But I'm always pushing against the God who loves me. And I don't know if you do that, but this has been the year for me to be pushing back. I don't like this. I want to do it my way. And I've been fighting it so hard and so long. But when it comes to what the Magi did, the Magi came to worship, not to stipulate what they wanted or what they wanted to continue doing. They studied, they set their heart on it, and when they got there, they gave Him His gifts, and they bowed down, and they worshiped Him. And that's what I need to do. That's what we need to do. What can we give Him? We need to give Him our heart. We need to give Him our will. We need to give Him our loyalty. We need to do like I did when I was at Snoqualmie Falls. I need to look up into the face of Jesus, the one whose birth we celebrate, and look at how amazing He is, and look at how much He loves me. So I want to explain it to you how I've learned this hard lesson over the past couple of months. So my own personal experience is that in June of this past summer, our pastor was preaching on the Psalms of Ascent. And in Psalm 126, verse 5 and 6, it says, "Those who sow in tears will reap with songs of joy. He who goes out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with him." So that sermon was not, I mean, it was a good sermon, but it struck me because, you know, I'm the one who cries easily. I'm the one that's the emotional wreck. And for some reason, I took great notes, but I thought about it and I thought about it. All of a sudden, I thought there's a purpose in my tears. And it's not that I hadn't read it before, but it struck a chord with me. And, you know, then it goes on to explain really the promise of Christmas. It says, God, back in the earlier Psalms, I think it was 80, it says, God's people ate the bread of tears, tears by the bowlful. And it says, but then the promise of Christmas is that God saw his people eating their tears, and he promised that someday I'm going to send my son. And my son is going to be a man familiar with tears. And he's going to take all your tears and he's going to spill of himself so that you can have a hope and a future, so that you don't ever have to shed any tears again. And he promised it by saying this in the psalm, the man at his right hand, the Son of Man, is the one that he's sending, that we may all be saved. So that's prophetic from the book of Psalms. And so I was thinking about this whole thing in a general way, but I kept thinking about my tears mean something, because I usually associate my tears with self-pity. And I think, that can't be good. But in this case, if you have tears to sow, then you have the potential of reaping a harvest. And so some of us don't have tears to sow, but I feel like I always have a lot. And I thought, well, good, I'll have something I can do with them. It's productive. So I thought about it for some period of time. And then I was also thinking about how I'm not the only one crying. And I know in a room as large as this, with so many people here, I know that there are women here who are hurting far more than I am. And there are this world is called a world of sorrows, a valley of tears. There's so many difficult things going on. One of my dearest friends just lost her niece after 18 years of brain cancer when she was diagnosed at 3. And the agony of going through that year after year after year, and then to lose her. And then there's just so much pain and suffering in the world. And my pain is my pain, but I want to recognize that there are some of you here tonight who are hurting in far greater ways, much deeper wounds. And I want you to hear this. I want you to hear this. There is hope for those of us who suffer. And it's not just hope of a restoration or that it's going to be tit for tat and you're going to get compensated. It's something far greater. It's something that's so much better. But if you think about it, when we're going through those hard times, my first question is, can God really love me? Is he mad at me? That's one of the things I always think. But the Bible tells us that Jesus took our punishment on the cross. And so if I'm suffering now, it's not punishment for something that I've done wrong. It may be refinement for me. Obviously, he's allowed it for good in my life. He's promised that. But when I'm talking to people about all the suffering and the evil and the havoc in this world, there's two ways of looking at it. Some people would say, okay, so if God is all-powerful and he doesn't do anything about all the pain and suffering in the world, mainly mine, then he can't be a loving God. And on the other side, if God is all loving and he's not able to do anything about it, then he's not all powerful. So how can there even be a loving, powerful God at all? And I think the worst thing we can do when we're hurting is to stop believing. I mean, it's a crisis. It's been a crisis for me, but we can't stop believing because the alternative is far worse. What I've heard is that we're to lean into our pain, lean into our tears, and do it in the presence of Jesus, the man of sorrows, who knows all of our tears and who wants to help us. So Christmas reveals that the Son of Man came to eat the bread of tears. He came to carry it for us. And it may not, the Bible may not explain why we suffer and why there's evil and suffering in the world. But the one thing that it does tell us is that it can't be because he doesn't care. Because of all the systems of belief in the world throughout all history, Christianity is the only one who has their Lord and Savior entering into all the pain and suffering of the world, to carry it, to suffer with it, to defeat it ultimately. And so from that leads me to continue to trust in him and to continue to hope. But this is what's interesting. So Sherry had asked me in July, Kim, what's going to be the topic for the Christmas event? So that's how far she plans. I know y'all know that. So on July 5th at 8:30 p.m., and I had this on record from my emails, I wrote her back, and I'd been praying about it, and I thought, I'm going to speak on the wise men and what can we give him, thinking that I'm going to give him my tears. And I thought this would be something, because it was really on my heart, and I thought this is the greatest thing. This is what I'm going to share on. It's kind of hard to figure it out. But then, that was on the 5th. And on the 6th, at 8:30 in the morning, I was up on a 16-foot ladder taking down the 4th of July decorations, and my bad hip went out, and my leg went through the slats, and I went off sideways into the water, and I broke my leg in 2 places, split my patella right there. Isn't that a beautiful scar? Isn't that lovely? Sexy leg, yeah. So I was out there. The water wasn't very deep. You know, it was like 4 or 5 feet deep. And I knew I was bunged up. I hit my face and tore up my chin and everything. But I knew I'd sprained my ankle, and I really hadn't even thought about my knee yet. But I was more concerned about being embarrassed because the neighbors saw me do it. And so they said, "Are you okay, ma'am?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Just fine. I was hopping along on 1 foot in the water. See, I'm just taking inventory. I'm just fine." So I went under the dock on the other side where they couldn't see me. But then after about 30 minutes, I thought, well, you know, I still can't put weight on this foot. And I was out there alone. All the family had gone back home. And so this is out at Kingsley Lake. And so I put the jet skis up. I hopped on 1 foot, put the jet skis up, lifted it. You know, I like to do things. I like to accomplish things. So I was doing things. Then I finally thought after about an hour, I'm going to try to put weight on it and see if I can get up to the house. And that didn't work. So then I had to humble myself and go to the neighbors and holler at them and say, "Would you mind, please, going into my house and going upstairs and into my bedroom, because my phone is right there by the bed where I left it, and bring it to me because I need to call for help." And it was a very humbling thing. But then I was embarrassed because I was out there in my bikini, and I couldn't get my husband, so it was my son-in-law, who is very lean, and I was afraid he was going to see my cellulite and think I was ugly. Like he doesn't know I already have cellulite. And then Reese came, and so this is my 16-year-old, and they were the ones that were going to have to carry me out. And I think I'm bigger than they are. I mean, they won't be able to pick me up and carry me. So I was thinking all these, you know, self-absorbed thoughts. But they ended up getting me, and I put my arms around them, and they got me out of the water, and I had to put all my weight on them, and I kept saying, "Are you all right?" And they kept saying, "We're fine, we're fine." But I was just thinking I was going to break their back. They were going to have to go to physical therapy like me or something. But anyway, so we ended up getting up there. By that time, I was going into shock because it was starting to hurt, you know, and so it was broken on both sides of the tibial plateau, and it was moving, and so that was causing a lot of pain. Anyway, it was the biggest mess you've ever seen, and they carried me up to the house, and you know, I was about to throw up, and I said, "Can you just pull me up in a wagon?" And they said, "No, that's ridiculous, because it's a steep hill." And I said, "Please, just put me in the wagon and pull me up." And so Reese, God bless him, he got that little wagon that we pull toys in, and he tied up my leg, and he propped me in that wagon, and they pulled me up the hill. So, I mean, that was pretty exciting. But as I was floating around in the water, thinking, "God, what's happened, and what am I going to do?" it dawned on me that the day before, I had committed to speaking about giving God our tears. And I remember crying and saying, "God, thank you for showing me this in advance, for showing me a glimpse of how you're going to use this for good." I mean, he captured my heart with the idea the month before. And then even with me breaking my leg, he gave me a glimpse of the fact that he was going to use it for good in some way. And it wasn't an accident to him. Little did I know that the whole adventure was going to be far worse than I ever thought it would be. But here's one of the things that I learned. One of the things I saw was when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were showing up the Magi, back in Daniel chapter 3, they were told that they were supposed to bow down and worship to a gold idol. And they wouldn't do it. And Nebuchadnezzar was so offended, even though Daniel was up high in the government, these 3 Jewish men, as bright as they were, would not bow down and worship. And he said, "You're going to go into the fiery furnace." And he said, "I'm going to even stoke it to where it's 5 times hotter." And the people who were making it hotter died. It was so hot. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, "We will not bow down and worship you because we worship the one true God. And our God can save us, but even if he doesn't, we're going to continue to worship him. And so they walked in there, and from some vantage point, King Nebuchadnezzar was able to see into the fiery furnace. And he said he saw 4 bodies walking around in the fire, and he said one of them looked like a son of God. And I thought about that as I was lying in bed after they'd done the surgery on my leg, and I was in the bed for 2 weeks. I remember reading that, 2 months actually. And I remember reading that and thinking, you know, I may be going through a fire right now, maybe a fiery furnace, but God is with me. He was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. And if he's going to be with them, he's going to be with me. And that's a promise, and that's something that means an awful lot to me. But also, God sees me. Jesus sees me here. Sometimes I feel like I've just been left behind. I like to be in the center of everything in my home. I do. And so I remember they put me in the back of the truck, and we had family vacation, and they stuck me in the back of the truck, and I was stuck across this way, and I had to go to the bathroom in a cup because I couldn't get out. The crutches were I was in this tall truck. Once they got me up there, I wasn't coming down. So, for the 8 or 9 hours I was going up there, but when I got up there, I was stuck in a bed, and I would hear them down the hall. Isn't this weird, not having Mom in the kitchen? This is really weird. Mom usually plans the menu. We're just having And I remember thinking, they don't need me anymore. Nobody cares about me. And I felt totally ignored. And I thought about the fact that God sees me. And when I was in my early 40s, I had a miscarriage, but it was one of those pregnancies that it was after my 21-year-old. And it was one of those things where the heartbeat was getting slower and slower, and you could just tell that it wasn't going to make it. And I remember reading in Genesis about Hagar. And Hagar had been dismissed by Abraham. She was carrying this baby, but she'd been mistreated by Sarah. And she was so scared, she ran away, and God appeared to her. And she said, I have seen the one who sees me. And I remember thinking how much that meant to me, because not only does God see me and know what I'm going through, but I was carrying a baby that was probably going to die, and I would never see the baby. But the one who sees me saw my baby. And it meant so much that I had a gravestone made, and I have it out in my yard, because I just couldn't, I grieved a lot over that loss. But knowing that he sees me and that he saw the baby that I could never see meant an awful lot to me. And so I thought about, as I was in the bed feeling sorry for myself, not only is he with me, but he sees me. He sees me all the way down to the bottom, and he knows what I'm going through, and he feels for me. And so it's like a steadfast mother seated at the side of the bed of a sick child. Jesus never slumbers or sleeps. He gathers our tears and he puts them in a bottle. And I could just see Jesus sitting beside me, and I visualized him stroking my head and putting his hand on my, like your mother would do when you were sick. And it was like he was just there with me, seeing me, knowing me, and I wasn't alone anymore, and it made me feel so much better. And finally, this one was so good. When I went to Camp Waldemar and learned to bow for the Queen, I also learned this little song. I want to linger a little longer here with you. Y'all know that one? Okay, it must be a Camp Waldemar song. Oh, you know it? Okay, all right. So, when I was reading about Mary and Martha after the death of Lazarus, Jesus gave Martha the truth. He gave her a sermon. That's what she needed, sent her on her way. But Mary was crying, and Jesus just wept with her. And it occurred to me that he was lingering with Mary in her grief. He was carrying her grief. He was weeping with her during this time, even though he could have said, I'm getting ready to raise him from the dead. Get over it. But he didn't do that. He loves her. He loves me. He loves you so much that he chooses to linger with us in our pain. And as I was lying there in the bed, it occurred to me that he loves me that much, that he's lingering with me here. He sees me. He knows me. He's with me in this fiery furnace. But he's choosing to linger with me, to count my tears, to fill them in a bottle. And he's doing it because he loves me so much. He loves me that much. And so I got to the point where I said, I think I can do this. So as Jesus lingers with me, I believe that this grief will be swallowed up in victory. It says, death, where is your victory? Where is your sting? Because of what Christ has done, death is swallowed up in victory. And so what does that mean? I don't know how it works, but I trust that all this suffering will be transformed into a weight of glory beyond our comparison, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 17. And through all this, I have tears that I can sow and expect a righteous harvest from it. So that's part of it. Somehow it's tied up in that. Somehow it being swallowed up. Our future hope is not compensation for the pain, where we're paid off and we're even, but instead it's an overflow, a restoration that is swallowed up. And when I swallow things up, I puff up and I get bigger and I get stronger. And when I was in the bed for two months, my legs withered up. And I used to think that would have been a good thing. But then it was all the cellulite skin hanging there. It just looked really nasty. My girls would say, Mom, is that your leg? And yeah, my leg. But, it didn't take me long after I got out of the bed and started moving around that, my legs started kind of picking up again. But swallowing food, it's digested and it goes to make us bigger and stronger. So the implication is that if death and suffering is swallowed up, if we sow our tears into the ground and it's absorbed and the nutrients come and the water comes down and the sun makes the earth warm and it comes into this huge bountiful harvest, it's more than just compensated. It's completely transformed and multiplied in glory beyond our best dreams. That's what the promise is as we go through this suffering. We all know that wise men still seek him, wise women still seek him, and we need to be seeking him during this holiday season. Starting tomorrow, we'll have 25 days till we celebrate his birth. And so we need to be seeking him in our prayer life. We need to be looking to him, maybe with tears in our eyes, and saying, God, I trust you, and I'm going to sow my tears. By faith, I'm going to give them back to you. I'm going to look to you like I would the waterfall, and I'm going to see the beauty of how you sit beside me as I weep. And you love me like a mother being right there by my bedside. And I'm going to trust that, knowing that you promised to produce a harvest. And what are we going to give him? I would say give him what you can't live without. Think about it. What is it? For me, it was looking good. That's gone. For me, it was being productive. 2 months in bed, I didn't do a darn thing. So he's taken things away that I thought I couldn't live without. And he's taken them away, and it's okay. I've recognized. So I'm more willing to give him what I was desperate to hold on to before. And then also, if we have tears, be willing to sow them. We need to be willing to sow them. Like Amal with the crutch. Are we willing to give that up? Are we willing to let the tears come? I remember wailing in the shower when I finally got in the shower. And I'm just crying, and I was mad at everybody, and I was mad at God. And then I started thinking, these are seeds to sow. And so it changed my attitude. Instead of self-pity, it was one of hope and devotion, commitment in the midst of the storm. And it wasn't easy, and it wasn't pretty, but I know it's true, and I know it will be true for you too. So remember when I told you about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They were never alone. And at Christmas time, we sing about God with us, Emmanuel. He is with us in the midst of all this. And all we have to do is look to him, look to him. And it makes you think, when Jesus was willing to go through his fiery furnace, why was he doing it? And what got him through it? What got him through the fiery furnace that Jesus went through for us on the cross? In Hebrews, it tells us it was for the joy set before him that he endured the cross. for the joy that was set before him. And we also know that he has promised to pay back and to redeem and restore everything that the locusts have eaten away. All the pain that we've suffered. And if Jesus was willing to go to the cross for us, if he was willing to suffer in the way that he was, then we should be willing to suffer for him. And so finally, I'd ask you this. When you think about what would make it worth it for Jesus to go through infinitely more suffering on our behalf, it was because he wanted us. He wanted us. So here's the last thing. Do you feel lonely? Self-pity is one of my biggest problems. And I felt like nobody cared about me and that I didn't have any friends, because I usually feel like people like me because I do things for them. And when I couldn't do anything, I felt alone. But if you feel alone today, I want you to realize that the Christ of Christmas felt alone. Do you feel like that you've been crying out and you don't understand what's going on and you're in such pain? Jesus on the cross did the same thing. So he is the one that we can turn to when we suffer, because he was a man of sorrows and familiar with suffering. And he was willing to go through it because of you and because of me. He loves us that much. So I just pray that during this season, maybe you'll shed a few tears. Maybe not. I hope you don't. But if you have tears to sow, I want you to know that it's a privilege. It's not anything that I would have asked for, but it has been a sweet lesson for me, and I'm so grateful that I was able to share it with you. And I trust that the eyes of your heart would be enlightened this season, that you would know the hope to which you've been called, and that you would be willing to follow him anywhere, to sow those tears, to say, not my will, but thine be done, and know that the one that you're giving yourself over to is the tender, loving one that sees you, that is with you in the middle of your storm, and the one that counts your tears in a bottle. He's worthy of our trust, and I think this is the season for us to give ourselves to him afresh and anew.